I'm Jisoo Kim, Director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies and co-director of the East Asia National Resource Center. I'm also Korea Foundation Associate Professor of History, International Affairs, and East Asian Languages and Literatures. I would like to welcome you all to our second GWIKS Roundtable discussion co-hosted by the U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University in South Korea. I would like to thank Director Hoong-Gyu Kim for the continued partnership. And the first roundtable that was held at the beginning of the semester in September was about U.S. ROK relations in the era of U.S.-China strategic rivalry. Leading experts from both the U.S. and South Korea discussed Washington and Seoul's strategic thinking and priorities in Northeast Asia. It was very successful and received many positive feedback from our attendees. Today's roundtable is about prospects for U.S.-China strategic rivalry and U.S.-Korea relations under the Biden administration. We are extremely honored to have distinguished speakers to share their thoughts with us today, and we hope this roundtable will lead to proactive strategic dialogues between the two allies. And our institute, GWIKS, will strive to continue to support that effort. Now, I would like to turn it over to Professor Hoong-Gyu Kim, who is the founding director of the U.S. China Policy Institute and professor in the Department of Political Science at Aju University. Professor Kim?
Yeah, thank you, Jisoo. Good morning, my dear distinguished American speakers and audience, and then good evening, my dear Korean colleagues. And my sincere gratitude goes to Director Kim Ji-soo and the Institute for Korean Studies at the George Washington University for co-hosting this roundtable seminar with the my institute, the U.S. China Policy Institute. South Korea and the United States are at the crossroads in the era of strategic competition. I sincerely hope we are able to modernize our relationship for all of us. The current role of experts are more critical of making the history than in any other period. So I sincerely appreciate willingness to share your precious time with us. And then I'm extremely honored to host you. So I hope we can have a productive time. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Jisoo and Hoong-Gyu. Now let us move on to our first session. I'm Yeon-ho Kim, Associate Director at GWIKS. In the first session, we will discuss the prospects for U.S.-China strategic rivalry under the Biden administration. And joining us today are the leading experts from both the U.S. and South Korea. And let me introduce them in an alphabetic order. From the South Korean side, we are joined by Bum Chul-shin, Director of the Diplomacy and Security Center at the Korea Research Institute for National Strategy. Byung-yeon Kim, Professor in the Department of Economics at Seoul National University. Gina Kim, Research Fellow at the Korea Institute of Defense Analysis. And Hoong-Gyu Kim, who just made a welcoming remark. And Sang-hyun Lee, Senior Research Fellow at the Sejong Institute. Wang-hee Lee, Professor in the Division of International Studies at Aju University. Young-Kwan Yoon, Professor Emeritus of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Seoul National University and former Minister of Foreign Affairs. And from the US, we are joined by Frank Januzzi, President and CEO of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation, Joseph DiTrani, former US Special Envoy for the Six-Party Talks with North Korea, Joseph Yoon, Senior Advisor with the U.S. Institute of Peace and former U.S. Special Representative for the North Korea policy. Mark Tokola, Vice President of the Korea Economic Institute of America. Sharon Squassoni, Research Professor at the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University. And Sheena Chestnut-Greitens, Associate Professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. I wish I had enough time to introduce all the roundtable participants one by one in detail, but for the sake of time, I'd like to ask you to refer to the bios in the program for the detailed information. So now let me ask Frank and Hoong-Gyu to make opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for a roundtable discussion. Frank?
Thanks so much. I'm really delighted to be able to join this virtual forum, and I'm humbled by the expertise I see on my screen, including Joe Detrani and Ambassador Joe Yun and Sheena Greetens, all of whom I admire their work and have learned so much from all of them. So I hesitate to put myself forward. I want to offer up a few thoughts that are really somewhat personal about Joe Biden and China as we think about the era of strategic rivalry which is upon us. But I want to emphasize that in most respects, the relationship between the US and China far exceeds the boundaries of the personal qualities of Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Xi Jinping. The rivalry at its core is one between two great powers, one superpower, one only superpower, I think, still the United States, but a rising great power, China, which wants to restore itself to a place of centrality in East Asia and a place of international respect. And it is the emergence of China on the global stage, 21st century, that I think is the most important strategic event of our lifetimes. And its full implications are not yet known because China itself is uncertain about its future direction. But Joe Biden's connection with China goes back to the beginning of that emergence on the global stage in 1979, when he made his first trip to China at the very beginning of 改革开放, the reform and opening up process that led to the creation of modern China. And the China that Joe Biden saw at that time emerging from Cultural Revolution was, of course, a weak player on the global stage, strategically threatened by the Soviet Union, economically backward, with many places just outside of Beijing, largely unchanged from the late Qing dynasty period. And it was a China that the United States engaged with a sense of confidence that the US position vis-a-vis China was tremendously to the US advantage. Joe Biden's second trip to China was in 2001, 22 years later. And I took him on that trip, and he saw a very different China, one which had modernized in its urban areas and affected a great economic growth period of 2 decades of sustained 10% economic growth. But even then, when he traveled with me to a little village called Yanzhou, Swallows Pass, just on the way to the Great Wall, he was able to see a China that was still very poor, still unpaved streets, lacking electric power in some houses. And he got a sense of the magnitude of the challenge that is in front of the Chinese leadership. And now we're 20 years since that trip. And China has surpassed many of our expectations with respect to its development. Grade A highways, high-speed rail, infrastructure projects domestically and internationally. And it's also emerged on the world stage in those last 20 years in a way that it was not a player previously, as a #1 source of trade, as a huge source of foreign direct investment. But Joe Biden's approach to China has largely been unchanged over these 40 years. It's a 3-part approach, rooted first in the notion that if China threatens US security, the US would have essentially zero tolerance. Whether that means arms sales to Iran or threatening US naval vessels in the South China Sea, or threatening US allies and their territories in East Asia, Joe Biden has expressed to the Chinese a zero tolerance approach. With respect to trade and international conduct, Biden supports a rules-based liberal democratic order. And so the message has been very consistent to China. We welcome you into that order, but only if you play by the rules. And when you violate the rules, we're going to call you on it. we're going to call you out, and we're going to use the international legal system, the international multilateral mechanisms, whether it's the World Trade Organization or the Nuclear Supplier Group or the Missile Technology Control Regime, to call out your bad behavior. And we're going to try to hold you accountable. And the third pillar of his approach to China has been on human rights. And on this, he's taken, frankly, a rather nuanced approach, a more humble approach than some of his colleagues, acknowledging that the United States also has tremendous human rights challenges and always has and still does, and will likely have those challenges moving into the future, but nonetheless expecting China to live up to not only its own laws, which in theory protect human rights, even though in practice they do not, but also to live up to international human rights norms as expressed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 2 international covenants on civil and political rights and economic and social and cultural rights that China has signed and ratified, but routinely violates. So this has been the 3-part approach of Joe Biden. And what has changed is not so much Joe Biden's approach to China, but China itself. It is China that is a more aggressive, more confident, more influential power on the global stage. And that's why I think you see the US approach to China changing, and why you see bipartisan support for a more muscular pushback against China's violations of international norms. And to me, the key is that 2 things. One is that I say modern China. I'm very much an acolyte of Jonathan Spence, my former professor at Yale, who taught me that China is a work in progress. China is not a fully formed modern state. In many respects, China is still an adolescent nation on the global stage. Even though it may have 4,000 years of history, it really has 50 years, less than 50 years on the global stage since the beginning of 改革开放. So in many respects, China is an immature global player, and we don't know precisely what kind of a player China is ultimately going to be on the global stage. It's too soon to say. And it would be wrong for the United States to conclude that China is its enemy or even its adversary on the global stage at this stage of China's global development. And the second point is that US influence over China is limited, but US influence is best applied in concert with other like-minded states. And that brings us to a subject largely of what we're going to talk about, I think, today, which is that the US-Korea relationship and the US-China rivalry in the context of the US relationships with South Korea and its key partners in Asia. And I think that's where Joe Biden's approach will also be very different from Donald Trump, because where Donald Trump saw the relationship as a one-to-one Xi Jinping-Donald Trump relationship, Joe Biden is going to see China in the context of the global stage. And he's going to try to manage or influence China's behavior in concert with other like-minded states, including South Korea, which means that South Korea is likely to be asked to make some tough choices by Joe Biden that maybe South Korea was not asked to make by Donald Trump. But the final point, so I did have a third point, I apologize, was that with respect to US-China relations, Joe Biden doesn't want to cut off the opportunity to cooperate with China on issues of common interest. So climate change, North Korea policy, these are areas where there's significant overlap, not perfect alignment, but significant overlap of US-China interests. And if we allow the relationship to deteriorate to the point where we cannot work with China on nuclear nonproliferation, issues like Sharon Squassone's, area of expertise, if we cannot work with China, on even human rights for North Korean guest workers inside China, an area that Sheena Greetens has explored, then we're really damaging our own interests through that inability to find common ground. And I think that's something where Joe Biden will try, but whether he's successful in finding that common ground and being able to work with China, I think remains to be seen. Let me stop there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much for your insightful comments with the historic background. Let me turn it over to Hung-Gyu.
Okay, thank you very much. This is purely my personal view. Historically, Korea has been a victim by surrounding great power competition without exceptions whenever regional power transition or strategic competition among great powers occurred. Now in the 21st century, South Korea sees itself increasingly entrapped in a strategic competition between the United States and China. In Chinese perspective, South Korea is a linchpin in East Asia, a critical objective of its neighboring foreign policy. Wang Yi once replied to the query of the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. He said, we go first on East Asia and Asia. This is his reply. For China, the most urgent and important issue with South Korea is not a denuclearization issue. China's serious concern would be to acquire a stable and sufficient supply of the memory chips from Samsung and SK Hynix in the midst of the U.S. China strategy competition. So probably another serious issue in security is to prevent the U.S. Deployment of the mid-range of ballistic missiles in South Korea in the near future. It may cause a second Cuban Missile Crisis in a Chinese version of, if it happened. Embracing Seoul is the key in the success of the Chinese, the so-called bicircular strategies. China also needs to include Japan and Taiwan in its regional value chain. Therefore, China will pay close attention to establishing better relations with South Korea and Japan for the next 5 years. China really hopes to establish the South Korea, China, Japan FTAs, and Taiwan issues subtler than any other issues. So China will be quite cautious of dealing with these issues. Under Biden administration, South Korea still serious, face choosing side dilemmas. Immediately choosing a side is not an option for the South Korea. The THAAD experience aggravate such dilemma. When the United States deployed the THAAD in Korea, China retaliated against the South Korea. However, South Koreans found no help from anywhere in practice. Of course, China also acquired the lesson from the retaliation. They lost the heart of South Korean people without spoiler. If South Korea, no matter what choice, devastating consequences are anticipated. South Korea and the United States need smarter strategies of cooperation to deal with these issues. Let me briefly introduce my own idea of South Korea's choice. In principle, sound relations between the United States and China are critical to the South Korea's survival. South Korea needs to modernize its approaches to the United States and China. My suggestion is the South Korea must take in Korean 결미 연중 plus strategies, which is first to transform the South Korea-US alliance to a comprehensive strategic alliance beyond military-focused alliance, which are well described in the recently published CNAS report, Renew, Elevate, and Modernize, a blueprint for the 21st U.S. ROK alliance strategies. The author suggested here, both South Korea and the United States must dramatically expand its alliance vision up to how to form and manage the new world order, helping each other strategically in these areas such as cyber and fourth revolution and public health and energy and climate change and the environment. I believe South Korea and the United States alliance itself must be one of the most important sources of the stability and continuity in a period of great uncertainty in East Asia and the world. In spite of differences, mainly due to these national capacities, there are inexhaustible sources and issues of cooperation between the two countries. My suggestion is South Korea and the United States must focus on establishing rule-based order instead of antagonizing China. This is a much smarter strategy, allowing China space to get in. My off-peak bilateral cost and benefit contest would likely result in the Pyrrhic victory for the United States, but we shouldn't drain out diplomatic energy from the alliance. To do so, it is extremely important to manage balance well in exchanges of both countries and to establish a decent relationship to draw more energies from the alliance. My second suggestion is South Korea has no choice but to pay respect to the strategic cooperative partnership with China. South Korea doesn't want to live in a Cold War with Beijing. South Korea's policy focus must be on establishing a rule-based international order, as I mentioned. I hope we can invite China to be one of the members in such a world. However, we strongly oppose to unilateralism and excessive parochial nationalism and zero-sum-driven self-destructive policies. In the meantime, my third suggestion is South Korea needs to harness a third space of international politics to contribute to the establishing a rule-based order in which even small and middle powers find a space for taking breaths. The third powers can help establishing global governance for crisis management with positively activating the role of middle power states. My suggestion in detail is to establish a South Korea-Australian and South Korea-Germany strategic partnership as an axis to enlarge the role of middle power corporations. Then South Korea expand its networks to other countries to have new rules and norms and institutions set up for new international order. Finally, South Korea needs to adjust its current North Korea policies from peaceful coexistence strategy to competitive coexistence strategies. The key for coexistence between the two Koreas is acquire conditions for mutual security. Denuclearization of North Korea is almost impossible in the era of the U.S. China strategic competition. The only solution is how South Korea effectively prepare for military means against North Korea's nuclear and asymmetric conventional warfare capabilities without nuclearization. In the meantime, crisis management on the Korean Peninsula are critical. I sincerely hope the Institute of Korea Studies at the Georgetown University and also my U.S. China Policy Institute are able to help each other and contribute to the process of evolving to peaceful coexistence on the Korean Peninsula in the future. Thank you very much, and then I will pass over the Kim to the podium.
Thank you, Heung-kyu. Thank you for your comments of the Korea's view on these critical issues. Now, let me open it up to the roundtable discussions. As I said before, the webinar is literally a roundtable discussion. So whoever wants to go first, just let me know by raising your hand.
Well, I thought I would just break the ice by going first. And really, thank you to GW, and thank you to Professor Kim and Frank for elaborating. Again, as Korean Peninsula is the main issue, I wanted to discuss some of my own experience when I worked on as a special representative for North Korea issues at the end of Obama administration and early on in the Trump administration. So let me just tell you that I would often visit Beijing to discuss Korean Peninsula issues. And I must say, towards the end, Beijing's attitude was quite negative, and they really made two arguments. The first is that North Korea issue especially is an issue between Washington and Beijing, and that Seoul or Tokyo, for that matter, should play little or no part in those issues. So that attitude, I think, still pervades Beijing. And I want to make sure that my South Korean colleagues really understood that attitude of China looking over peninsula issues. Second item that they pressed upon me is that we can make no progress or China will not help US make progress on the Korean Peninsula or North Korea issues until US China relations are improved. So there's no question in my mind that any improvement in how we deal with North Korea has more to do with Beijing, Washington than anything else. So, and then the last point I wanted to make was that Professor Kim Hong-gyu's kind of idea of the trilateral relationship. It reminds me that, to put it very simplistic terms, that US and South Korea should be married. This is alliance strategic relationship. While, a relationship between Beijing and Seoul is more of a, I don't know if it's politically correct to use this expression, more of a relationship with a mistress, and I'm not sure that's going to work real well in current environment. And the idea that South Korea should not be forced to choose, once you put up that idea, it is very difficult for Washington to accept that idea, because as far as most of Washington is concerned, South Korea has already chosen, and so less we discuss the idea of South Korea having to choose, I think it will be more Biden administration certainly would welcome less discussion about having to choose, because as far as most Americans are concerned, South Korea has already chosen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Yoon. I think our South Korean colleagues would have something to say. Yes, Professor Kim, Pyongyang Kim.
Thank you so much, Frank and Hong-gyu, on very interesting talks. I would like to ask this question to both presenters. Both of you have emphasized the importance of a rule-based order or rule-based approach in the new administration. From the Chinese perspective, how would you evaluate this is a kind of gain or loss? Because China will compute benefit cost in the Biden administration, which emphasizes the importance of rule-based order. But what are the rules? That is a bit unclear. Rules may apply to, say, technology, economy, security, geopolitics. As unless this rule-based order is clearly defined, China may have difficulty in computing cost and benefits. I think one way to mitigate the shock from uncertainty in the new administration, why not clarify what is meant by rules? What kind of rules the new administration think of? Thank you.
Yes, Frank, did you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. Briefly. So I know there can be differences in the interpretation of what the rules mean, but I don't think there's really a lot of doubt about what the documents are that comprise the rules. And so China's WTO commitments are not universally understood, but they are written down, and they are subject to adjudication and mediation. And China routinely violates them. The irony is that China has benefited more than almost any country on the planet from the liberal, democratic, rules-based order that was established at the end of World War II. China is the huge beneficiary. of the peace and stability, the foreign investment, the predictability, the reduction of uncertainty, the reduction of great power conflict that has come about through that rules-based order. But we shouldn't expect that China would become a member of it and have no thoughts about how the rules might be changed. Now that China joined the club, it's like, maybe China wants to have casual Fridays at the Cosmos Club. And they want to be able to go into the dining hall, without the tie. And if you're a member of the club, you get to have a voice in the rules. And that's something the United States has been a little bit reluctant to do, to acknowledge that as a member of the club, China gets to have a voice in what the rules are. So I think we have to show some tolerance for the notion that members get to have a voice over what the rules are. But I don't think there's really a lot of doubt about what the rules are currently. And I think there's also very little doubt that China routinely violates them. And nowhere is that more pronounced than on the human rights front, where again, the Chinese may claim that the US and other European powers prioritize political rights, which they don't consider to be rights. But China signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. China signed and ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Those are unambiguous international legal documents. And China routinely violates them. Most countries do, by the way. The U.S. violates them too. But China's violations are on a whole different order of magnitude. I quickly want to address one other question that Steve Bosco put into Joseph Bosco, sorry, put into the chat about China's ultimate objectives on North Korea. It seems to me that China's ultimate objectives on the Korean Peninsula are to ensure that the Korean Peninsula, North and South, don't pose any strategic threat to China. So they would much prefer a Korean Peninsula that was not fully integrated into a US alliance structure. But I think China no longer, if they ever did, really aspires to try to force a unification of the Korean Peninsula on Chinese terms. I think it'd be more than satisfied with a sort of a pliant South Korean state that was respectful of Chinese quote unquote core interests, core values. Nor do I think that the Chinese aspire, as some Americans do, to sort of trying to expel the United States from Asia. That is an aspiration far beyond China's strategic capability to ever achieve. And so I don't buy into this notion that the Chinese are wedded to some kind of an expulsion strategy on the United States.
Thank you, Frank. Hung-kyu, did you want to respond? And then let me ask Dr. Sang-Hyun Lee to give his remark.
Thank you for the Ambassador Joseph New's comments. I appreciate. And then, we certainly, South Korea certainly married with the United States. But we South Koreans found sometimes the husband so bad and asking, too much. And then also sometimes the husband is not able to feed his wife. So the wife is so shocked at the behavior of that kind of husband. And then, but I don't agree with the Ambassador Joseph New's the argument that our relationship with China is a kind of mistress, the kind of, and then but China is a kind of supply chain for our economic survival. It's not only mistress. So the United States cannot replace the role of the China. So that's the problem. And then U.S. main threat is China, but South Korea's main threat is North Korea. But we are alliance. So there is some gap. But of course we can overcome and then the gap and then to communicate each other well. And strategically we maybe have some better modernize our relationship. And then this is my suggestion. And but then we have to talk more and seriously. And then I really agree with the Professor Byung-Hyun Kim's argument. Why don't you clarify the rules? And then China, of course, try to set the rules, and then United States wants to set the rules. But what I'm afraid is the United States and China entered into a kind of chicken's game. then both cannot resolve that kind of, this kind of, gain. Then third parties' help are necessary. So that's why I'm asking the, United States and China to allow the space, and then also for the, third parties, like Australia and Germany, South Korea and Canada and other countries together. So we can, all of us together can set up the rules. Of course, I'm sure that we are married with the United States, and then also the Moon Jae-in government's policy priority is to, consolidate the relationship with the United States. I'm quite sure. Okay, Sang-hyun, please.
Okay, Sang-hyun and then Mark.
Well, thank you. I have one question to both Korean and American presenters. Hung-kyu, you mentioned US and Korea should work together to enhance rule-based international order. I absolutely agree. But already we discussed a little bit about it. The problem is that whose rule is this? Who will define what kind of rule is this? Okay. So even though we do not, South Korea do not intend to antagonize China, when we say rule-based international order, it may already antagonize China. Because I think when you say rule, it already presupposes some kind of a value that China cannot easily accept. I think that's the key problem. So how can we pursue a rule-based international order without antagonizing China? I think that's the very essence of the issue. And Frank, you mentioned that US influence on China is limited, but if US join with allies and friends, then we can have much more influence on China. And that may push South Korea into a very difficult position. I think that's exactly what's happening in Australia now. Australia, on a certain issue, they take some attitude, and China doesn't like it. And because of that, they already revenge Australia. So this is kind of another problem. So how United States can give a little more reassurance to these allies and partners when they choose some value in line with the United States? What kind of assurance policy can United States can offer?
Thank you. And let me take, Mark would have comments or questions, so please go ahead.
I had two questions, but Professor Yi just asked what are the two, so that leaves me one. For Kim Hung-kyu, on the idea of regionalism and multilateralism, it seems like the Biden people are very clear they strongly favor regional cooperation. So I think Korea is going to be pushing on an open door and wanting to talk about coordination with other countries. And I would think that it'd be a good topic of conversation between Washington and Seoul about what regional groups might do, what they're for, who should belong to them. So you mentioned the Korea-Australia link for one. And it gets to Professor Yi's question about the difference between rules-based and anti-China. I mean, you mentioned that Korea was alone in dealing with THAAD retaliation. Australia is now under great economic pressure from China. So would a conversation about how to resist such pressure, either THAAD or on Australia, be pro-rules or anti-China? How would that be seen? And then my last question is, how does Japan fit in your hierarchy of countries? Is it a middle power, middle plus, great minus? How does it fit into the system?
Thank you. Whoever wants to go first, just let me know.
Thanks for the questions, and thank you, Lee Sang-hyun. I should know better than to be on a program with you because you always ask the best and toughest questions. I think it's really important that the U.S. offer reassurance and support for its allies if the U.S. expects allies to stand with the United States on issues where those allies may have to pay a price. The Athenians sent their navy to defend their small allies routinely when they wanted the small allies to join with them in some larger venture. It's not just the U.S. Seventh Fleet, but I mean, the U.S. response to the whole THAAD episode, I thought, was fairly pathetic. Why didn't the United States do more to stand with South Korea when China was retaliating against South Korea economically for deploying an anti-missile system that the United States, in consultation with South Korea, felt was necessary for South Korea's defense? The United States needs to be ready to pay a price to support allies if we expect them to make choices. But the more I think about your basic question about whether the United States can ask its friends and partners to not choose sides in terms of U.S. China, but to choose to commit or not to commit to defense of the rules-based international order, the more I think that tough luck. Yeah, you're going to have to choose, because if you don't defend the rules-based international order, you're going to pay a heavier price down the road. So even though it may in fact antagonize China to stand up against illegal fishing, we have to do it, or else the oceans will be devoid of fish. And even though it may antagonize China to stand up against blowing up satellites in orbit because it creates debris that threatens global communications and our ability to have Earth observation satellites to track disasters, tough luck. We're going to have to criticize them for it. And even though it may antagonize China to join a resolution in the UN against imprisoning 1 million Uyghurs in labor camps, well, guess what? We either believe in those norms or we don't. So, I think attitude matters. I don't think the U.S. should approach these issues, with an anti-China attitude. I think the Taido, right? The Taidu matters. But in terms of choosing, either to defend those norms or not, I think South Korea is going to have to choose one way or another.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, the Minister Yoon and then Hung-gyu.
Thank you very much for having me in this very timely workshop. And I enjoyed our discussion very much so far. And I'd like to make a brief comment how I think on this tough issue. I mean, in other words, how to maintain strong alliance relationship at this time of rising tension between the United States and China. I'd like to explain this way. I think both allies, the South Korea and the United States, have something to do on each side. First of all, both allies had better establish a kind of government commission composed of high-level officials and experts to discuss the future of alliance and to produce a common vision for the future of alliance. I think that's very important. And the election of Joe Biden as the next president, has provided a right political environment for having that kind of commission. As we know, alliance was created almost 7 decades ago, and the international and domestic situations have changed a lot. And we have lots of new challenges to overcome. Without having kind of a new purpose and new goal or new definition of our alliance, there will continue to be some misunderstandings and miscommunications and mismatches of policies between two allies. So if we can share a common goal, it will make bilateral cooperation much easier when we deal with many complicated pending issues like denuclearization of North Korea, or SMA, or OPCON transfers, etc. That's my first suggestion. And for the South Korean side, I think we have to consider that the two most important keywords of Biden administration would be democracy and alliance. And South Korea is one of the most successful US allies in terms of achieving the goal of democracy and economic growth. As also South Korea is as a state is based on its important values such as democracy, freedom, human rights, or multilateralism, etc. So when the new Biden administration pursues a diplomacy based on those values, I think it's natural for South Koreans as an ally to cooperate closely with the US government. In that regard, I think our relationship with Japan probably will improve sooner than later because I mean Japan is another democracy and US ally in Northeast Asia. And I think our president has already sent a clear signal to the Japanese side on this. Also, I think U.S. ROK alliance has developed from a military alliance narrowly focused on deterring North Korea to economic alliance as well as global alliance. And on global issues, we both allies have a lot of things to cooperate with each other. For example, South Korea could accumulate some experience and know-hows on how to deal with pandemics or environmental issues or developmental issues. So I think we can cooperate on those issues. For example, in the region such as Indo-Pacific, for example. And finally, what I hope the U.S. could do, the Biden administration could do in coming years is this. I hope the U.S. government would pay much more attention to the geopolitical dilemma South Korea has been facing. As Professor Kim Hong-kyu already mentioned, South Korea's geopolitical situation is very difficult. And whenever there were direct military confrontations and conflicts on the Korean Peninsula, Korea experienced huge difficulties, terrible difficulties like division or war or colonization, etc., etc. So in that regard, I hope our ally, the U.S., would pay much more attention to that kind of uniqueness of South Korea's geopolitical dilemma. And I hope the U.S. side would understand the fact that from South Korean perspective, North Korean issue is much more imminent a security matter than any other regional issues in the region. I think this is the difference between South Korea and other countries like Japan or Australia. So I wish, the Biden administration not try to apply one size fits all kind of security policy or alliance policy toward South Korea. And I hope the U.S. Biden administration understand that South Korea cannot but focus on stabilizing inter-Korean relationship. And if the U.S. government helps South Korea in that regard much more actively, it will help South Korea to work with the United States in on the other regional threats. So I think there are those things I hope both countries can do. In that case, I think bilateral alliance relationship will be maintained strongly at this time of increasing tension of U.S.-China. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Yoon. Before I turn it over to the Bomchul, Hungyo, did you have anything to respond to the questions raised, addressed to you?
Yeah, I think everybody wants to set up their own rules, and then everybody wants to, dominant, So the problem is who is going to lead, and then, who is going to expand their own sphere of influence. And then China now wants, I do not think China try to, be dominant over the world, and then they want to set up their own rules within the sphere of their own influence. So Chinese is crying out, and then don't bother me, that kind of, crying. But the problem is China is growingly, expanding their own influence of spheres, and then gradually, and then, change the kind of paradigm, okay? So, but the key is how to draw a kind of heart of the other people and other, nations, both countries. United States also has suffered a kind of a deficit of confidence for the rest of the world, we experienced, and then also the in the SAD, issues, we also experienced the kind of bitter, situations. So that's why we want the rest of the world to work together, and then also United States able to attract the people and to set up the rules, and then China must follow the rules, and then we can find the kind of juncture between the two sphere of rules. Then who is gonna dominant, and then the other of the world hope to follow. Then that's become the rule. So I hope the United States and lead the world, and then also show us the kind of standard, and then let us be competent. This is what we want, and then we married with the United States anyway. So I really hope the United States, doing well. But if Trump re-elected again, and then some chaotic situation in the United States, and then it's give us a kind of total chaos in our heart. So.
Okay, thank you, Bomchul.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'd like to raise a short question to both presenters. First to President Janouji, good to see you. It's a long time no see. My question is that what is continuity and difference on U.S. foreign policy between Obama administration and Biden administration? I was working at the government from 2013 and 16. That was the exact same term of Obama administration's second term. But the voice you raise today is almost the same than that of the Obama administration. So I'd like to hear about the difference. Second question is to Professor Kim, that you raise the issue of middle power diplomacy. I agree, I worked on the issue a bit, but my question is, even if those middle powers get together and raise his voice, I think that the country who pay attention to the voice of middle power is United States. Do you think China is going to really respect those voice of middle power? I have some doubt on that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left for the first session, and I think when I looked at the Q&A box, the first couple of questions we already addressed, and the other questions about North Korea, I think we can deal with them in the next session. And the one question I think I like to add for Frank is how much will Joe Biden and Xi Jinping listen to policy intellectuals? That question, I think, Frank, you can answer to. And then let me ask Hung-Kyu to respond to Pomter's question.
Thank you. Joe Biden listens a lot to policy intellectuals. He surrounds himself with policy intellectuals. When I worked for him in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, we had a very stable staff. I was there for 12 years and basically zero turnover. And Biden always wanted to hire people who were more expert in the particular issue than he was. He was also very humble. He had confidence in his judgment, but he was cognizant of his lack of training and expertise on many issues, whether it was climate change or the Korean Peninsula. And so he always valued being surrounded by intellectuals and experts. And he read their briefing papers. I would get briefing papers back to me with questions and mark up, by Joe Biden. He would read a 10-page memo and send it back to me with questions. So this is a very different guy than Donald Trump, who doesn't take a briefing and thinks that he knows all the answers. Joe Biden very much knows what he doesn't know, and enjoys going to school with experts. But he uses his own judgment. He would argue strongly with me. We'd come out of a hearing on China and he would say, Frank, what did you think of the testimony by Bill Gertz or somebody? And I said, oh, I thought he was crazy. And Joe Biden would say, yeah, but he was right, wasn't he? And then we'd get into a fight, an argument. And he enjoys learning through argument. This will be an administration marked by curiosity, by fact-based analysis, and a careful policy process where competing ideas are brought to the president for final judgment. In terms of continuity with Obama, to be honest, I think there's going to be a lot of continuity on foreign policy, a lot. A reliance on allies, a reliance on multilateralism, a reluctance to use force, a desire to see allies shoulder the fair share of the burdens of global governance, an emphasis on global nonproliferation, a continuation of the Obama effort to try to make progress on global nonproliferation. Where I think there will be difference, probably a somewhat more serious rhetorical commitment on human rights, but not just rhetorical, but sort of, using the bully pulpit of the White House. And that's going to rub some people the wrong way, including North Korea, probably. But I think the biggest differences, to be honest, will be domestic. Because domestically, Joe Biden is going to be a civil rights president, and Obama felt that he could not be because he was a Black man. And that if Obama had been a civil rights president at home, he felt that it would make his entire presidency about race, and that was what he wanted to avoid more than almost anything. And I think you're going to see Joe Biden being a champion on race relation issues at home in a way that Barack Obama could not be. And I think that's going to be a big surprise to a lot of Americans who thought that having the first Black president was the moment where we were going to confront race, and we didn't. And I think Joe Biden is going to be extremely active in that regard on the home front.
Thank you. Hung-Kyu.
Okay, we just intrinsically focus on the authoritarianism and then the top-down approaches and the dictatorship, that kind of one-man show, politics. So they seems not to care about the majority and then also the will of the others. but I do not agree with that kind of, presumption. And, whenever China is in trouble with the great power, diplomacies, they care about the majorities. Always, they're, try to, strengthen their, the neighboring foreign policies in 1960s when they dispute with the Soviet Union. And when they were in trouble because of the Tiananmen incident, they focus on, again, the majority and then also the neighboring countries' diplomacies. And then now China also focus on the majority instead of, focusing on the United States. And so they want to expand their own sphere of influence. So, and also they are not accustomed to living in a kind of, rules by laws, they over some, principles. Then what is the governing, principles of, taking care of the people? That's a kind of majority, and we call mainly people's, will. Even though they are afraid of the kind of collaboration of the people and the collaboration of the groups, and they are very good at, scattering the kind of will and the kind of efforts. But because they, underestimate the kind of majority, but they are very afraid of, the kind of efforts. So this is in Chinese terms, 합종, 거종. So we, the kind of collaboration of the, other small and middle powers still matters in Chinese, a way of their orientation of foreign policies. They are very careful. They are very sensitively watching over. So that's why the will of the, our common, countries or small and middle countries, efforts to set up the rules are still meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, let me conclude the first session on the prospects for the U.S. China strategic rivalry under the Biden administration. And let me turn it over to Hung-Gyu again, who will be moderating the second session on the prospects for the U.S.-Korea relations in the new U.S. administration. Thank you.